I don't know if Ben was not able to attend or not. I haven't heard from him, so we'll just like wait one. I will. Why don't we get started? Are we good? Okay. Seeing a presence of a quorum, I'm calling to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee on Tuesday, September 20th at 6:31 p.m. And because we're remote, we'll begin with a roll call. Please state present when I call your name. Peter.
Peter is present.
Irv.
Present.
Jennifer.
Present.
And Allison present. First up is approval of our minutes. And the minutes are attached there. I'm going to apologize. I need to answer a question really quick. Hang on. Okay. Were there any edits to the minutes from August 31st? I had one edit, and it might be that we stated it incorrectly during the meeting. So, but I feel like it should be written, included in the record. It was about the upcoming budget coordinating group meeting date. I'm trying to see where that was. The meeting is tomorrow, the 21st, not the 24th. That was the only edit that I had. Maylene, I can tell you exactly where that is if you give me a few minutes. I'll text you later. If there's no other, then I'll move that we approve the minutes as amended from August 31st. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Peter, and we'll take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Allison, aye. Irv?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Thanks. The motion passes unanimously. Next is public comment, and we received one public comment, which is attached in the agenda, but I'll also share my screen. Are folks seeing that? And before moving on, I will I'll remind folks that we accept public comment by email to scpubliccomment@arps.org at any time up to 3:30 on the day of our meetings. We also still accept voicemail messages to the phone number that's listed in the agenda, as well as we welcome live comments from the public. Um, just wanted to note that, but also the comments tonight were regarding a topic that is not under the purview of the Amherst School Committee. We discussed this at our last meeting. The Regional School Committee is representing both the Amherst and the Amherst and Pelham school committees, as well as the regional districts in the negotiations with the APEA union. And because we have a quorum, generally have a quorum of that committee, we do not discuss that topic at these meetings. With that, I will move on to superintendent's update and turn that over to you, Mike.
Thank you. I'll start with a solemn one. I think everyone by now has received notification about the passing of Anna Burns. Anna was a student at Crocker Farm. That's how I first met Anna. I was still principal at Crocker Farm when they started school. And while this is a topic we'll probably discuss a bit more at the regional level, I did want to acknowledge that Anna was a student through our elementary school. And I wondered if we could just do a moment of silence at the beginning of the meeting to acknowledge her passing and the impact it's having on many people in our community. So I'm just going to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you for that. No good way to transition, but I'll transition ahead to talk about open house schedule. So the open house dates are Crocker Farm on the 28th of this month, Fort River on the 6th of October, Wildwood on the 10th of October, the 13th, excuse me, of October. And actually the Early Childhood Center at Crocker Farm, I think this is nice, is doing their own night. So it's a small percentage of the students at Crocker Farm. So sometimes they feel a little swallowed up with all the other commotion at the K-6 audience. And so they're having their evening event on the 12th of October. Certainly school community members are welcome to attend any. It's the first in-person open houses we've had in 3 years. So very excited. I know there's many family members and community members interested in being back in the building and seeing where their kids are learning. You know, for parent guardian conferences, we're giving families the option of in-person or virtual. One of the things that we found is that when it comes to conferences or rather brief meetings, it's actually for many families been extremely convenient to do those virtually. Doesn't involve leaving work or childcare or things like that. So, you know, when we get to that part, we'll give families the option of whether they would choose to have the conference again in the school or virtually. But we're looking forward to the open house date starting soon. I just came back about 15 minutes ago or so from Fort River. Their parent guardian organization had a popsicle party and an unveiling of the mural in the front. I wasn't able to stay for the unveiling part, but it was a good reminder of all the work that our parent guardian organizations do and the tremendous supports for our schools. There were lots, I didn't count people, but you know, definitely 3-digit number of people at this event at Fort River, and just how wonderful it is to have an event towards the beginning of the year that's so welcoming. So I just want to thank not only the Fort River Parent Guardian Organization for that, but all of our parent guardian organizations who make a huge impact on the lives of our students, but also in bringing the community together in some really novel and interesting ways. So, you know, kudos to all of them, and Fort River, a great event for this evening. Something that I'd like to come back to on a future agenda is just this week I was looking at enrollments, partially because of the 6th grade move, but partially just something we do in the fall. And, you know, we're starting to notice a real significant change in trends. Some of that's Commandante, some of it's not. But at this point, Fort River is the K-6 population at Fort River is significantly larger than the other 2 schools. And that is a significant change from the past 10 years. So as of yesterday morning, there were 380 K-6 students at Fort River. There were 323 K-6 students at Wildwood, and that's a significant reduction from 5 years ago, and 290 K-6 students at Crocker Farm. And so you project that forward a year when we have 1 grade level less, and I think there's a lot of implications on staffing, on space, that we should really have some conversations about. And certainly we're starting to have that at the kind of leadership level, but I do think, you know, in terms of principals and HR, but I think it would be beneficial for us. But I did want to share that we are seeing these change in trends, and some of that's attributable to Comandantes, but certainly not all of that. And Fort River hasn't had 380 students in quite some time. So just something to come back to, but something I wanted to share. My second to last item is that we are in the midst of completing safety walks with our schools, and I want to thank our public safety folks, our police department, our fire department, ambulance, first responders, as well as our facility department. What that looks like is the previously mentioned groups walk around with the principal. I've been able to attend most of them. Our facilities team, and we do the outside and the inside of the building, and we look for safety and security measures, what's in place that looks good, that's working, and what are some things that we need to adjust. And so I was over at the high school, for instance, today. I'll be at Crocker Farm tomorrow for these walks, and it's a really fantastic collaboration because it's proactive work. It's not responding after there's a situation. It's walking in the building inside and out and saying, where are there liabilities and how do we solve those? It's something that we did pre-COVID. I think, one of the things that's been great to do again is we're now upped our technology game. So there's the fire department's taking photographs throughout the school of different areas, and the reports that they provide to our facilities and principals, will help us get better, in improving things. And some are small fixes, some are longer term fixes, but it's really helpful to have that collaboration. And talking to my colleagues around the area and the region, it's not typical that this is a routine part of the work to do proactive work in this way. So, I want to thank the police department, fire department for their continued support and service of our schools. My last one, I'm going to try something. I don't know if it's going to work, but Comandantes, this would be the world premiere, has created, working with someone with more expertise than we have locally, has created a video to start sharing information more widely about the Comandantes program. And the audience would be, a broad audience, but potentially prospective parents as well. So if my Wi-Fi connection holds, I will play the thing. If it's getting choppy, I will email it, and it'll be out in, newsletter and everything in a couple of days. But I thought it'd be kind of neat to share it here. So I'm going to give it a whirl. If it's choppy, jump in or raise your hand, and I will, because I may not notice it on my end. Please let me know. But there's two versions. There's a short version and a long version. And the short version is 3.5 minutes. So I think it's well worth the time to give it a try.
Tiene el programa Global Caminantes, que brinda una educación en inglés y español a nuestros estudiantes, 50% inglés y 50% español. La realidad es que la diversidad es lo que hace especial a nuestra escuela.
The goal of the dual language program is academic achievement, bilingualism and biliteracy, and sociocultural competence. One thing that makes Fort River so special is that we have so many teachers and so many adults that are involved within each classroom. So you'll see, reading specialists working with students, and math specialists, and ELL teachers, and classroom teacher. So it really is viewed as like all kids are our kids, and we're all working together to meet the needs of all of our learners.
I feel like Amherst is a really wonderful place that really embraces this multiculturalism and sees it as a strength and really values it and tries to bring it in as much as possible.
Casi siempre pasa a principios de año escolar, los estudiantes llegan un poquito frustrados, no me saben lo que yo hablo, lloran, pero a la semana ya se sienten más cómodos, empiezan a decirme, mis cuevas, ¿puedo ir al baño? Mis cuevas, hoy es lunes. Eso me encanta.
Para nuestra familia, saber que existía este programa bilingüe fue muy importante porque de esa forma pudimos conectar todo lo que los niños estaban aprendiendo en casa también en la escuela. Y de esta manera conectar con otras familias que tienen también niños bilingües y que pueden conectarse unos con otros y aprender y continuar aprendiendo su idioma.
He talks to me about his friends and he pronounces their names in Spanish sometimes, and sometimes he pronounces them in English. So there's that. I can see he's learning about different cultures and ways of seeing things. One of my favorite things about the program is that before
come in and started, I would rarely hear Spanish spoken at recess by students that I knew spoke Spanish, and now Spanish is spoken all the time, and it's just really powerful to know because you know that what their language and their culture is cherished and valued and encouraged. So that's just really special.
Maestro de inglés y de español me han enseñado a leer mucho en inglés y en español y ahora sé un poco de inglés. Y también puedo leer un poco en español y inglés.
La realidad es que para que un estudiante aprenda tiene que sentirse cómodo, tiene que sentirse seguro, tiene que sentirse bien en donde está aprendiendo. Nuestros maestros altamente capacitados saben que el aprendizaje no es una cosa que se toma la ligera, no es algo que tiene que ser aburrido.
It's a really amazing process to see them come in with one language and grow over time too.
So sorry about the echo. I did see that, but hopefully you're able to get a lot of the video out. There's a long cut, which is about 6 minutes long. But, just kudos to Kitty Richardson and the Commandante staff for putting together, I think, in a 3.5-minute video, an awful lot of content and an awful lot of cute, which is sometimes hard mixed to have put together. So sorry, the audio wasn't great, but again, we'll be getting that out in other media, and that's more an artifact of my Wi-Fi than it is of the quality of the video. But just really proud of our program and our students, and I'll just say it's amazing now that it's in 4 of the 7 grade levels, how large a group that is of students who are participating. I remember when it was like the first year, it was like they were like this, unique little class, 2 classes in a corner of the school, and now it's much more integrated without the school. And that brings me to my last thing for the update, which is on Friday at 10 o'clock. It'd be brisk but sunny, which is good, is our Puerto Rico Day celebration that we've done for quite some time, and that's on the town common. Our guest speaker is Alexis Santiago, who's the Crocker Farm librarian, who's about to win an award or be recognized at the State House in about 2 weeks for her contributions to education, and particularly as a Latina. So she'll be our keynote speaker, but we'll have many schools represented, not just Comandantes, not just Fort River. So if you can get over to Town Hall, a lot of town staff will be there as well. Hopefully Earl, who I see here, will be over there. He gets lots of events, so we appreciate that. And it's a great time. So 10 o'clock this Friday, right in front of Town Hall. We hope to see as many people there as we can. And that is the end of my update for the evening.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike? Irv?
Mike, would you please send out that schedule via email in relationship to the open houses? Thank you.
Peter?
Thank you so much for sharing that Comandantes video. That was beautiful. That was really wonderful to see. And I'm so excited that we'll be able to share it with the town at large. I just remember the excitement and the positivity when we were talking about this program and it was coming into being, and we had so much positive support from members of the community who don't have kids in the schools, but we're just super excited about all the values that video talked about. And it really comes across in that, like, I don't know how you did the the production values on that are really good. It's not it doesn't come across as like expensive and slick. It comes across as very authentic and colorful and joyous, and just really wonderful. And it's a great example of how we have such a latent opportunity, I think, a potential to be sharing more of the positive things that happen in our schools, and promoting them. It's like sometimes I feel like what goes on inside our buildings is like the best kept secret in town. And if people only know the public schools through school committee meetings, it's a very shallow whisper of what actually is going on. And So that was really awesome. A quick question on the safety walks. You talked about how sometimes you identify things that improvements and whatnot. Is that something that you think could have, are there items you've identified that could be FY24 budget impacts that we might be talking about at JCPC, things that we might want to think about earlier rather than later, or just the context of that?
Yeah, in terms of capital, absolutely. I mean, we do the safety walks at the beginning of the year for obvious reasons, but the other reason is that there are sometimes items identified that do need significant work. I'll give you an example of a while back. I'll give you two examples, actually. One is at a safety walk quite a few years ago, some of the doors at Wildwood and Fort River, we're seeing that just, we shaved them down as much as you could, but they were end of the useful life. These are the exterior classroom doors at those two schools. And, we had multiple years, we asked for capital, and we knew we couldn't do them all in 1 year just because not only the capital need, but you couldn't get anyone to do that many doors. So, a couple of years ago, we completed that project where all the doors that were in need of being replaced were replaced. And I think, well, that's actually the cleanest example. I'll just leave it at that. So yes, certainly in terms of capital needs, that's, the other reason we do it early in the year is to inform, potential things. Sometimes they're not capital, they're just things that need to get done. And sometimes there are, particular capital needs that occur that we need to request.
Other questions? Seeing none. Moving on to the next item, Chair's update, which I do not have an update for this evening. School committee updates. I think as mentioned when we were going over the minutes, the budget coordinating group is meeting tomorrow afternoon, I think it is. And Peter and I are representing us. The agenda topics include a topic that we discussed at our last meeting, which is the charter school tuition accounting, and I think a process for this upcoming budget. Any other announcements from the committee? Seeing none. We'll move on to the next item, our new and continuing business. So we have the CRES involvement in the schools, and we have a guest joining us, Earl Miller. Thank you for joining us tonight. And just a context, I think, for this one, this was a conversation that came up, I think, at our last meeting, because the sort of the work that Mike has been doing with Earl and the CRES team. And sort of, I think with that, I just lost my train of thought. So I'll just turn it over to you, Mike, to introduce this and kick off this topic.
Yeah. So going back, and I'm trying to think of how much context to offer, because we could just talk about the context for an hour, and I don't think that's what anybody wants to do. But so CRES was formed by the town. As in terms of the schools, we have a great relationship with the police. We have a working relationship. I think I referenced earlier, we were just talking about the safety walk and those pieces. And while we don't have a regular police presence at the schools, they're our partners when we have safety concerns. That being said, we were, at the school level, thrilled when this force was created. And we always, I think we've for many years practiced and strived around restorative practices about collaborative problem solving and trying to do a lot of preventative work. And, to us, I say me, but I think it's collectively, I can speak for the leadership team. We were thrilled to be working with a new agency in the town who had many similar goals and aims and desires and connections. A number of the CRES employees are former graduates of our schools. They walk the halls of Crocker Farm, Fort River, and Wildwood. Some of them have family members. I mean, one of the neat things was first day of preschool and kindergarten, I was at Crocker Farm, and there's someone from CRES with a family member starting preschool, adorable 3-year-old, and a CRES officer right next to them. So Crest responder, excuse me. So, you know, in terms of goals and aims, there's a lot of connections. Last spring, Earl was Crest, right? Thankfully, Earl is not the only person at Crest right now, but, you know, there was a couple situations, you know, one at a bus stop, you know, things that were happening in the community where we were thrilled to have someone who was in the community and could work on problem solving. And so we accessed a couple times, I think 2 times at the elementary level last spring. Now Crest is more fully up and running with a larger complement of responders. And, you know, to date has really been connecting in terms of making relationships, building relationships with families, with students. You know, at the elementary level, that's kind of the primary role that Crest has played. But I also think it's worth noting that Earl, along with Scott Livingstone and another representative of both Earl's of Crest and another, you know, Sergeant Ting, we met as a leadership team during our summer administrative time. And it was an open-ended dialogue between Crest, the Amherst Police Force, and our leadership team about how we can access resources. What is the best way? How do we work in collaboration? And I just want to say publicly, I'm just incredibly impressed with Earl and his staff that they're, you know, cliche expression, but building the plane while they're flying it, right? You know, like they're creating something that is unique, because in most Crest-like forces, the schools are not part of the charge, right? So if you think of other, you know, if you Google, you know, not Crest, but you'll just find Crest. But if you Google, you know, nonviolent responders or things like that, they're very focused on town dynamics. And, you know, my appreciation for Earl and frankly for Paul Bockelman is that they see the direct connection between the community and the schools, right? So you could create arbitrary barriers, but what happens in the town affects the schools, and what happens in the school affects the town. And so, you know, Earl and I are working on developing an MOA. So that's something that sort of was in the works. My time got shifted towards the end of last week by multiple challenges. And so I have not been, it's on me. I've not been looping back to Earl as I planned towards the end of last week. Time got away from me. But it is something that we do plan to bring to you and bring to the public to kind of further solidify who does what and roles and responsibilities. But I think a couple of things that I want to start with is we work with lots of town agencies. We work with the Amherst Health Department. They give vaccines away in our schools, right? Both flu vaccine and then COVID. We work with the police department, as I mentioned. We work with the fire department. I was with them today. And so for us, it's really continuation. It's a continuation of a partnership that we have with town agencies. Yes, Crest doesn't operate exactly like those agencies, but I think the same kind of paradigms that we think about when the fire department's in our schools, that's how I view the same paradigm when Earl or his staff are in our schools. It's, you know, we're fortunate to have them. We feel very touched and unique to have access to a Crest-like force. And I'll turn it over to Earl because I did a little more talking than I thought I would, but I thought it just needed the context of how are we currently working. And I think we're having some successes and we're scratching the surface of what we hope the relationship to be a year from now. But Earl, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I very much appreciate that warm welcome, Michael. So I just kind of want to start off with our approach. We are fundamentally different than the police and the fire department by charge. So things that I want to commit to you, we're going to be releasing a mission statement soon, kind of laying this out, is that we do not participate in surveillance. We are not a law enforcement agency. Our charge is not to identify potential criminals earlier in life. We have only consensual engagement with folks. We have no ability nor desire to detain people or to speak with people who don't want to work with us, which I know is a really different way of thinking of public safety. But unarmed for us doesn't mean just not having a weapon. It means kind of being able to approach people open-handed without any sense that even if the engagement goes poorly, even if the relationship doesn't work, that they're going to somehow be punished. That is not within our purview and certainly not in our hearts. We really do think of ourselves as what we hope every social service agency would look like. We are able to solve problems without worrying about how much money a person makes. We are able to help solve problems without the other person fearing that if they offend us, their life will change. And we are able to address issues without dramatically changing the trajectory of a person's life outside of their own hopes and dreams. That is a really dramatic, different approach to public safety. So I know sometimes when I say that, it sounds like kind of fairy dust. Like, what does that mean in practice? But it means that we are really committed to building relationships where people are able to look and expect support that is meaningful and driven by themselves. So in working with families, we take a family-centered approach. We believe that all families need support, certainly ours do, and that we can be helpful. So just an example, on Friday, we delivered lunches for the senior center. We supported a family around a loved one with dementia. We helped out at Craig's Door for a little bit. And we helped some folks who needed to know where public facilities were. So a little bit of education for our downtown population. So working with the schools is really close to all of us. A lot of my folks are parents of school-age children who go to school in town. And so the idea that we would design this thing and we would miss the two ends of our town, sorry, my dog is not well behaved, that we would miss the seniors in our town who are often not seen of as full citizens, or the children in our town who are often not seen as full and participating citizens, would be such a missed opportunity for us. And also, selfishly, I'll say, we learn a lot from being at the school. We learn a lot about how families want to be treated here. Crocker Farm made me cry the first time I saw it. Just the pictures of families on the wall. And the way that Derek knows the stories of all of those families was so impressive. And so I guess my altruistic thing is we see children as future residents. And one of my goals is that some of these kids will want to grow up to be CREST responders, the same way that I hope some of them will want to grow up to be firefighters and police officers in this town. And so that means getting to know them earlier. And my selfish reason is that your staff is so immensely talented that my folks get better just by being around them. So those are my two big reasons for the schools. It's been a really wonderful collaboration. And part of why I didn't move forward on the MOA is I really want to hear from you all what you think our role should be before we put it in the paper. I know how important this work is and how often you think about it. So I don't want to exclude you from our kind of visioning process here. So that's my long-winded diatribe. I promise there's an even longer version of it. So I spared you as much as I could, but glad to talk about or answer any questions folks might have.
I didn't think that was very long. That was well said. Thank you so much. Questions? Peter.
So thank you very much for that description, and thank you for the work that you've already done to support our students. I really love everything that you and Mike said, and so I think it's a really positive vision to incorporate in the schools. Generally speaking, I feel like social services writ large, at least in our state, that's my only experience I have, are drastically underfunded and understaffed. So whenever there's a positive social service that can be made available to families and students, it's a big win. So that's the sort of goal I'm looking at. I guess just one question and a comment. So Allison, you feel I can break it up into two things if you want. Could you give some specific examples of the kind of thing that you've already been in the elementary schools for? I think just getting some kind of without obvious personal details or whatever, but just the nature of what kind of what does it mean to be building a relationship, to have an engagement at the elementary level?
Yeah, so I would say the two kinds of engagements we've seen with the schools are the consultative, kind of they're mulling an issue and they're trying to figure out who they can refer a family to. And one of the nice things we're able to do is actually call that provider, see if there's slots open, see if it's a referral that might move things along, so that our kids and families don't get stuck on wait lists for any longer than they need to. The other piece I would say is really just kind of as simple as Michael described it, problem solving. We've provided rides for students to school when there were challenges, either in the family or on the bus. Some of my responders were at recess with Derek, and just having another adult there kind of allowed some of the school staff to go finish up some projects they were worried about. And I think that's really it. I think one of the things we're working on with with Fort River is potentially going to read to some students. We have a Spanish-speaking responder who is from Ecuador, pretty shy guy. So this is one of his fears, but is going to go read a book to a class so that they can get that from someone who's a native Spanish speaker, which I think is also really, I think there's the engagement activities, which are just getting the teachers accustomed to what we can be of support in. I'll give you an example that wasn't elementary school, but it was in in a high school. Was, there were some tensions between students. We were just asked to be there, and actually, kind of when the tension broke, there were a lot of tears, and we immediately left because there was no more tension. And tears are kind of people needed to have that moment with their teachers. So we're really light touch. As soon as the problem's resolved, we want to kind of move on with our day. Not really so that we can get back to work, but so that as soon as possible, we can return everybody to the kind of regular milieu. I hope that was a good answer.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Since I'm just looking to see if anybody else has questions, and I'm not seeing any, so I have one, but go ahead. But it's minor. So, Irv.
I mean, I like everything that has been said, and I have really serious questions that I would like to ask outside of this meeting. I do not wish to take up the time of this meeting, but I have some serious questions that need to be asked. But one of the things that I am concerned with is that anytime you have a new department agency within the community, and from what I am observing, you have what I consider to be mission creep, i.e., if you looked at all of the forums, all of the studies, etc., that went before in terms of creation of CREST, the schools were never mentioned. In terms of where the responders would be going, the schools were never mentioned. In terms of the services that would be performed, the schools were never mentioned. They just were never mentioned. And, I have a lot of concerns about where this is going. And my major concern is it's sort of like nothing is free. So when I see that CREST is offering services to the schools, I do not want to, in the future, at some point, the town saying, hey, look, we're providing these services for you. You need to pay for them in one way or another. I.e., will we get dinged on our budget for some reason in the future because of the services that are being performed? I don't know what need those services are fulfilling that wasn't there before and being fulfilled by the regular staff. All right. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I do not wish for the school, especially the elementary school, Amherst schools, to be put in the position of saying, hey, we now are possibly dependent upon these services that we didn't have before and that were being fulfilled some other way. But the town is now fulfilling those, but at some point, we get billed for them or are asked to pay for them.
So just kind of a quick reply to that. That's above I think some of those budget conversations are above my head. What I would say is that there is no intent on my part, any plans to bill anyone. We haven't scratched the surface of grant funding even. And, really our goal, like I said at the beginning, is not to become profit driven. Our goal is to provide services townwide, and lots of other, town departments and public safety do that. But again, some parts of that conversation are above my head. As far as mission creep, I spoke with the LEAP folks who wrote that report. And part of why they didn't speak to schools was because they didn't think that we would have the capacity to do that. It turns out that upon our training, we do have some additional capacity. There will be times where that's likely stretched as there's larger college events, as there are other issues in town. And that just may be true by the nature of the work. But again, I can only really speak to the pieces that I control, and the kind of long-term budget issues would need to be a conversation with the town manager.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share my perspective on it, which is in Superintendent Update, I referenced a number of other town departments who have come in and done work for us. We never get billed. It's not the way the town has worked with my experience. I can only go off my experience, and I'm not trying to minimize your comments at all, Irv. Is that we work in partnership. I talk to Paul regularly, and again, what I said before, and I know Paul's a big believer, and remember he's chair of school committee in Somerville, is what happens in the school affects the town, and what happens in the town affects the schools. And so for us to have additional resources that sometimes are different than what the school has to offer, particularly on the community element, has a unique role that anyone who wears an ARPS badge doesn't have that, can't have that perspective, right? As neutral as our staff can be, we have some limits based on being a public school district. And I think that's the unique part for us, that Crest can fulfill a need that, sort of by definition, we sort of, we struggle with on that other piece. And in terms of, right, so when the, town health department did vaccine clinics in our schools, we never got a bill, right? It truly is a partnership. If that ever changes, I'll be really sad and really loud. I'll put it that way. Those are the two things I'll be. And so I don't think there's any indication that I've received from the town manager or the town finance director that this is something different. I think as their vision, which is Earl, as Earl describes his vision that they're developing, it's for it to affect the town as far and wide as possible. And certainly, the health of the town and the health of the schools are integrally, connected. So that's my 2 cents. I'm not saying I'm right, but that's my experience and my perspective and kind of summary of my conversations with town staff.
I just want to add too, part of this is a shift in the way that social work has been done. That's kind of happened generally, but the pandemic really moved it forward. That adverse childhood experience study, which is a kind of evidence-based look at the way that trauma intersects with public health and public safety, shows that the further you can get upstream in supporting kids, and that often means changing the way that their parents behave or shifting their home environment, you can drastically impact the way that trauma impacts them. And there really is no way to do kind of best practice social work these days without meeting and integrating families into the midst of your practice. I come from the Department of Mental Health, and when I was there, we had a children division that was also very small. And while I was there, I would encourage you to talk to folks. I was the first director of recovery to spend much time with the children, youth, and family group because there is no way to prevent trauma without becoming a part of the way we raise kids. It just, that is a national best practice.
It's an interesting, thank you for all the clarification, Mike and Earl. But thinking more about some of the comments that or issues that or concerns that Irv just raised. Meanwhile, it may not be a town sort of bill and accounting, but I think politically there's this perception that, and I think that might be what you're sort of keying into a little bit, Irv, is that because the schools are benefiting from Crest, we therefore don't need to ask for more money for our operating budgets.
Exactly.
And yeah, and I think, I mean, when we get to the point that we're looking at the MOU, I think that can be a place where we can sort of clearly delineate what are the supports and services that only the schools can provide and that the schools need to continue to provide. I like how you've described that, Earl, in terms of sort of the whole family, which actually isn't technically under the purview of the schools to a certain extent. The schools can only do so much in that area, particularly the social workers and mental health professionals that we have within our schools. Their focus is on the students themselves. So I think that will be a really important part of that MOU, and maybe it doesn't belong in the MOU, but that's something that we need to talk about more when we get to sort of our budgeting, is being really clear about what are those services that the schools are providing and need to continue to provide, even with this layering in and beautiful support that we're going to be getting from the community through CRES, I think that will be super important to make sure that sense, because it literally was stated during the budget conversations a year ago from some town councilors that was, why did we need more money for mental health if we're benefiting from CRES? So I think that will be important. Jennifer hasn't spoken yet, and I see her hand raised, so I'm going to give her the floor.
Thanks. I appreciate Irv's line of questioning, which I somewhat interpret as, at this point, questioning the premise of CRES in schools. Like, before we jump to an MOA and talk about how will CRES be involved in schools, like, I think this is the right time to talk about, should CRES be involved in schools, before we talk about what it would look like. And so I just appreciate like having that conversation at this point, because I agree with Irv. Like, there was really no talk about schools when CRES was being first talked about and developed. So without no, like, is this a solution looking for a problem? And it sounds like that's not the case. I mean, from what the superintendent has said, like, there are places where CRES could be of benefit. But I mean, and I know, like, if you think of CRES as a police alternative, which I know is probably not the right way to think about it, but if we think of CRES as sort of filling in or performing supports that the police maybe used to do or would have done, but since we don't have a police presence in schools, then what is CRES's role, and should they have a role? So I think this is the right time to talk about those things. I'm less concerned about budget impacts, based on what Mike has said about the fact that we haven't ever paid the town for any of the support services that we've received, but just like, this is the right time to have this conversation. I do have a question for Earl, which is that you said that there is excess capacity in CRES to do support for the schools, but given that CRES is so new, like, I guess my question would be, like, how do you already know that you have excess capacity, given that you're so new in the community and the program is so young?
Yeah, so a lot of it was looking at what is insurance tasks, what for supports folks can get from kind of publicly available insurance, what other service providers exist. So part of our charge is not to be a duplicative service. So if someone can get what they could get from us from someone else, then we want to provide that. So what we're finding is that a larger band of challenges are actually referral issues. And so it takes up just less time doing those referrals. We had some advanced time where I was able to work with providers to set up some really kind of clean referral pipelines. I also just want to talk about actual amount of times we've done things with the school. Most of our contacts have been with the high school and middle school. As far as the elementary schools, we've been there a handful of times. So I just don't want to overstate like how much actual work there is. These are issues that school doesn't have an answer to, that the principal is reaching out to us to find a different alternative. These were problems or challenges that were always going to be referred out to someone, or they were going to be insurmountable. I don't think like we'll be doing cafeteria coverage at the school. I think we're talking about targeted, generally resource problems or problems that might inhibit someone from attending school. It isn't like there's any plan where we're going to be at the elementary schools every single day, all the time, kind of high-fiving kids on their way in. It's really kind of targeted challenges that we're brought in on. Does that make sense? You got quiet. I don't know if I lost you all.
Yes, thank you.
I'm just going to go in order of first spoken, just because I see everybody's hands up. So I'm going to go to Peter and then Irv.
Yeah, so a few things. This is a good conversation. So I think, echoing Jennifer's point a little bit about, what is the problem that this program, these services are solving. I still think, and again, and I don't want people to share personal information, obviously, but having a better sense of what we mean by issues, problems, challenges, resource, like I still don't have like, you know, if you put it to me, I still don't think I could articulate what y'all mean by that. And so it could be things that have already happened in the handful of engagements in elementary school. It could be things that Dr. Morris or Earl are thinking about. And you know, when you frame it as problems, challenges that principals don't have an answer to, they would be looking for additional support and referral anyway. That to me makes a lot of sense. And it relates to another my second comment, which is, you know, if we you know, if we put together an MOA, I think one of the key things we have to be mindful of is being very clear on lines of authority. I think whenever any representative from any government organization comes into the schools, it has to be unambiguous in terms of who has the authority for access, who has the authority to impose discipline, who has the authority to tell a student, you know, that they have to be here at a certain time and place. And you know, and it especially in light of you know, and nothing Jennifer said, which is, you know, the knee-jerk reaction people have if they don't understand what CRESS is, oh, it's a police alternative. And at the elementary schools as well as a region, you know, school committee in the community has been very, very clear that we don't want you know, police formally, you know, as a steady presence in our school. We, you know, we've passed resolutions against school resource officers multiple times. And so so I think that's one piece that needs to be very clear in an MOA. And because it's an MOA between ARPS and CREST, not between, if this was just between Mike and Earl, I would, you know, it's much different, right? But like, you all aren't going to be in the positions forever. And so we're setting up an institutional relationship. And you know, relates to the last point, which is I do think that communication to families and to students about what CREST is in general, as if CREST becomes a more regular presence at schools, is really important. You know, I'm thinking back, you know, several years ago during the previous presidential administration and ICE and all of that. You know, which is obviously still an issue, and we have a number of undocumented families in our community. And whenever a government, I mean, we all know this, whenever any government official shows up, if you don't understand all that background and you're not confident, you know, there's a certain level of anxiety there in terms of what that means. You know, that being said, overall, I'm still very positive on this because I do believe, and I love what Earl said about engaging families and raising kids and the national best practice. I'm 100% right with you there about you know, social services need to be there for families, immediately accessible, and getting in early. For, you know, we've already talked at this committee and other committees about trauma informed learning and what a priority it is for our district for mental health, to be able to engage families and students with a trauma informed mindset. So this is I think it's all really good. I just think we need to be mindful of what those other context issues that are need to be addressed as we move forward.
I really appreciate this conversation. You all are asking really good questions. And I think, like Michael said, we are building the plane while we fly it, which means that some of these questions are kind of still being bandied about and figuring them out. I actually think the person you all might need to talk to is actually Derek Shea. Since he's been the person who's reached out to us and I think has seen the resolution, part of our hope is that, you know, we don't want to ask people to trust us. You shouldn't. We are a new government agency, although I will share that one of our responders' father was deported when he was a child, and you can take this commitment that we will put into steel that we will never participate in any deportation process. We will not participate in any processes like that. That's a commitment that we have internally, but you should be skeptical. We are the government. We aren't the police, but you shouldn't believe that until we show you we're not. So I appreciate the skepticism, and I hope that this is a conversation that looks really different in a year. But you guys have the most sacred resource in our town, so you should be really discerning about it. And I appreciate this.
Mike?
Yeah, so you know, I'm trying to give tangible examples because I think that's what folks are looking for without, you know, it being identifiable. But I think here's one that we struggle with often. So we have kids in school, and based on challenges in the community, those challenges come into the school. And sometimes those challenges aren't between the children, but between the adults in the community. And we as a school district are really challenged to navigate interpersonal conflicts between adults that don't happen on our school property. Like, where is that line where schools are going, right? And our experience is that that has not always been received and welcomed when we want to try to participate. And so I think the impact of that is that we have kids coming to school who are having conflicts, not because of the kids, but because of community challenges. And so where CRES has been effective in working with us is they're not the police, and they've been able to work through some challenges that are influencing things in school that didn't originate in school. And I think someone used the term, what are the schools not doing? That's a real challenge for us. When it's community-based challenges, our charge is to do school, right? And we obviously do lots of wraparound services beyond that, but that's our charge. And it feels really different when we have a non-school entity that's not in charge of the children, who can do conflict mediation and try to get to resolution without the stakes that happen if someone who's an authority figure in a school that's in charge of your children is involved. So that's a really tangible one. And that story has happened, right? It's not a mythical story, right? And so I think there are many areas where the interconnection between schools and community is very, very tight. And because we are in charge of schools, not because people don't try, not because it's not the best of intentions, the best of effort, our boundaries don't extend as far as Earl's, right? And so that partnership has benefited our schools, because if conflicts are happening less frequently and with more support in the community, our schools aren't dealing with those challenges in the same way. So that's just a unique role that CRES can play. That have principals and teachers been in meetings about that? Absolutely. Do we feel like we've always been successful in those? I would say that we have not always felt like we were successful for community-based challenges that then enter the schools, particularly when it relates to adults. The kids stuff we can handle on. Yeah.
I'll add on to that. Just, we helped one of the schools get through a particular challenge at the end of the year. We didn't resolve the issue. Really what we did was kind of allow the school to make it through that kind of this academic year, so that they could think through the summer on what would be an appropriate response. And then we provided actually both sides of the conflict with some services. One kid involved, we took to their first football practice. And we'll continue to support that family as long as they want us to. And, we're already thinking about what we're going to do for Thanksgiving with them. That is a contact point that happened at the school. But all of that happened with the parent's permission. The first engagement was with the parent to make sure that they were okay with us being involved, and then to identify the challenges and work through them. And, it's not my story to tell, but she still picks up our phone calls. So that's a great sign. And it's, on our end, it was really rewarding. Like, I have kids, they're not as little as this kid. And so I forgot what it was like to have someone appreciate a ride to school. Haven't had that in a while. And also just to learn about the town from someone who's kind of living in it in that way was really special. And again, working with the principals who I just find to be really thoughtful folks.
Thanks. Earth.
Earl, everything you're saying resonates on a lot of different levels. And my only question is whether that is something that the schools would engage with CRES around. With that one example of the adult to adult conflict that could spiral into kids coming to school. Now that's a great example where if there were appropriate social services agencies in place, that could be addressed, but they aren't. That is one specific example that I think has some traction with me. But however, the thing that I am concerned with is that there doesn't seem to be a really good definition, explanation in terms of the roles, goals, objectives mission of CREST in the schools. More importantly, I really need to see a memorandum of understanding that includes in it a thorough legal review by school legal counsel, so that we know where we're standing and how we're standing, and it would provide us with a level of comfort that I don't think we have right now, because we don't know. Yeah. When you talk about a consensual relationship between CREST and the community, but when you say CREST in the schools, the thing that comes up to me is, well, if that is a consensual relationship, that means that the student needs to know, the parents need to know that it's a consensual relationship, so that people can behave accordingly, which means then that you have to have that information distributed in such a way that it's understandable to not only the parents, but also the students, especially at the elementary level. So anyway, I'm not going to go on with this. As I said, there are some serious questions that I have, but I'm going to be doing these offline with Mike and some other folks in town. But I do believe that there is a service that can be provided to the schools within the parameters of the CREST mission. But that mission has to be something that the wider town conceptualizes and agrees upon, and that the town council embraces. Because, you know, Mike, you're right. The police give services, but they don't come in the schools on any kind of regular basis, or into ways that we're talking about CREST here. You know, that's different. The public health, that's different, totally different. And I believe that the town council, finance committee, etc., could conceivably say, hey, schools, you're getting this service. CREST is costing the town X amount of dollars. We want you to take your fair share of that. Right. And so that needs to be thought about very carefully by this committee.
If I could just respond briefly. So two quick ones. One, I think you're right, Irv, that, Earl and I are working together to figure out that vision in the right place. CREST has not been particularly involved in the elementary level to date, as Earl noted. I think the second thing that's worth saying is that this was reviewed in terms of what CREST is and their role at current with our legal counsel, who saw no concerns. So,
wait a minute, Mike. If that is so, would you please provide us with the memo or any written responses that you got that to the school committee from the legal counsel, so we can have some.
I'm going to suggest that because I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think what I've heard at the beginning is that we don't have. You're working on an MOU. Yeah. You'll be coming back to us with an MOU. So I think that might be the opportune time to have that full discussion about sort of the legal ramifications of that, and sort of have that information for that next discussion.
Yeah, and let me just say something real brief, because I don't imagine you guys will have me back too many more times. Part of the piece that I want you all to hold alongside me is that the entire country is watching us. We will have folks from California, Pennsylvania, Florida coming to visit us over the coming months. And one of the opportunities we have here is we're re-looking at public safety. And I think sometimes in those things, what we get held to is what departments that have existed for decades have. The idea is that the reason this idea is never tried in communities is because there's so much aversion to a new thing. And I know that pieces of this new thing are uncomfortable. I promise you, on a daily basis, I have to hold myself back because there's something I thought I did that just ain't quite there. But there is this opportunity to reframe what this looks at. And I want you to be a part of that conversation. It isn't solid right now, but I want you to feel like you're a part of solidifying this. And I don't want our young folks to be excluded from the opportunity of this, even if just as this wonderful thing that's happening in their community. So I appreciate you, Irv. These are tough questions that will make us better, that will make this engagement stronger, and we'll all benefit from. But just help us to figure out how to make this work here, because because I fear that kids will continue to miss out on this, as there are dozens of programs that don't intersect with schools, despite the real value it could offer. So that's I'm getting off my speech post. Thank you all for your time. I don't know if you still need me, but I'd be glad to come back anytime you'd like.
Thank you, Earl. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to finish saying?
I just wanted to clarify the comment, which was, I did have a conversation with legal counsel about this low level involvement that CRES has in our schools as being a town department. And there was no concern expressed by our legal counsel. It was not suggesting, and I'm sorry I wasn't clear about that, there wouldn't be things in the MOA that they would want to take a look at. But at the level that we've talked about here, much like any other town department, the insurance is through the town. All those pieces, there were no concerns expressed. And I think I emailed you that, Irv, but I'm sorry that maybe I wasn't clear in the email that I sent to you about that.
So I think when we get to, hopefully the MOA will be ready for our October meeting. And Earl, it was great to have you here. And since we do have so many questions and things, it might be helpful if you're available to join us again for that conversation. We'd love to have you.
I look forward to it. Have a great rest of the night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Earl.
Irv, I think since we're going to be coming back to this again, is
just
question?
It's just in relationship to what Mike said. A conversation with an attorney is a conversation, and a conversation with an attorney that ends up in something written back from them is a legal document that one can rely upon. And that's what that's the difference between what you're saying, Mike, and what I'm saying.
Mike?
Yeah, I don't want to extend this dialogue too long, but I'm going to choose not to. I think we should move on. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we get to future agenda planning, we'll circle back to this, but it seems like this will be a topic on our next meeting in October. So we can dig some more into those questions. So moving on to the next item up is the Commandant's extended absence and transfer policy. I don't believe this has changed since we looked at it last month at our meeting. But I think we had such great conversation about that at that time. Oh, I think there was a minor edit based on the discussions that we had. So wanted to bring it back and give us an opportunity to sort of affirm as a committee our support for this policy, or not. Mike?
Yeah. So the one change that I recalled completely, was specific that I gathered. I might have missed some, so I apologize. Was to remove the parent sabbatical as a possible reason. So that's been X'd out of this version. Certainly if there's other changes that the committee would like to have considered, or to offer feedback on, Katie wasn't able to come tonight. She's involved in the other thing at Fort River, but we're very open to that. But that was the one that when Katie and I debriefed it, that was really clear. And again, we are fully in support of. I think that was a great suggestion. I believe Jennifer raised that point. So thank you, Jennifer. But if there are other ones, we wanted to bring it back here to see if there were other changes that would be recommended by the committee.
Questions? Jennifer?
Yeah, so when we talked about removing parent sabbatical, which I support, thank you. I guess I had thought or hoped that that any reason would be removed. Like if at some point you were willing to consider allowing a student to be absent for a parent sabbatical, if you were willing to consider that at some point, then as I guess I was saying last time, then maybe it doesn't matter what the reason is. It could be a medical need or a family emergency, or it could be a parent's job that's not a sabbatical, or I like just in an effort to make to broaden the guidelines as opposed to make them more strict. I'm glad to see parent sabbatical removed. I kind of was thinking that like any reason would be removed, but yeah, I guess that was my only thought about that. But that being said, like if you're saying that like we want to really discourage, we want to really like encourage families to maintain consistency and keep their children in the program, and we really would like to not have any students miss time, so that therefore we want to make the policy a little bit more strict, then I'm fine with the proposed change. But just like if this document is going to be the actual policy, I don't have it in front of me right now, but like you just might want to add an and or an or in between the just to reword it so that it just reads a little bit more smoother if we do just remove the parent sabbatical line.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you for that, and sorry for that syntax error that was created. So, our current thinking, again, which we're open to discussing, is that because the removal from Comandantes removes a student from their cohort that they've been with, we talked a lot the last time about why it's problematic for the program to have that. But one can imagine, in our opinion, a child has a major illness and has to miss school. And then is able to come back after 7 months, that, we want to have some, I'm trying not to find other language to use, but have some empathy for that situation and try to work with that family. I know it's gray, like what constitutes a family emergency or a medical emergency. But, so far we haven't had this come up very often, which is a good thing. But I think that was the thinking, that, if a student had a medical emergency, that would not preclude them from rejoining their cohort, because that could be a double impact on a kid or a family. Or if a family, we were just talking about deported. So if there's an immigration issue and the family has to leave for a period of time, then comes back. So you're right. And I want to acknowledge and honor the point that I'm hearing, that, it does create some exceptions. And anytime you create some exceptions, that can be a little tricky. But for us, try to find the right balance. And I think the sabbatical is clearly a choice, as opposed to a family emergency or medical need. And that's why we completely agreed about removing it. But that's sort of how we came to where we are without the syntax that we needed. So thank you for that as well. But I just want to explain our thinking on the matter.
That makes sense to me. Thank you, Mike.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I like the policy as currently written. Yeah, and I actually like the family emergency phrasing, because it rightly communicates that there should be a serious situation if you're going to be taking time off. This isn't just lobby the superintendent and hope that you get a good ruling. That this serious thing, and also that there is going to be a level of judgment call. Like I don't think with 10 meetings we could sit here and articulate every possible scenario, and then punch it out in the list. Like, I mean, family emergency is a pretty ambiguous term to begin with, but I think it reasonably connotes to participants that, oh, this isn't just our vacation got moved and we have to fly on this date and not that date. This is a serious thing. And so I think those two things, I think, connote that well enough, and stay at the level of policy prior to implementation that I'm comfortable with. The one reasoning I didn't understand, just because I'm not familiar with it, is the number 2 under transferring into the program. Students can move into the district and request entry. And so the second condition is the student previously attended a dual language program and demonstrates appropriate level of Spanish proficiency compared with a true peer. I'm wondering why it's not just demonstrates proficiency with a true peer. Why would we want the additional? Well, you have to have been in according to Hoyle, dual language program, and not just have the language ability.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just, that's why we have these meetings. So someone who wasn't part of the writing of it comments, and then you look at it and you say, yeah, I think that's right. I don't know why we would delineate more than we needed to on that one. And I think we can definitely simplify that language and not include as much content, because I don't think it really adds to the definition. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm just looking, do we want to see this again one more time before voting on it?
I have a marked up copy I can share if that's helpful. I mean, with those
Oh, that would be
changes.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Great.
Mike, can you just read the 2 change sections since not all of us have video tonight?
You're muted, Mike.
Sorry, one screen. I'm very, yeah, I'm not as capable. So I will read the first section, which was based on the comments last time by Jennifer, which now reads, if a family is not residing in the district for reasons of family emergency or medical need, the following amounts of time will be allowed as an absence from the program without forfeiting the child's seat. And then it goes on to describe the amount of time, which is unchanged. The second change, which was based on Peter's comment just now, transferring into the program, number 2, the student previously attended a dual language program and demonstrates an appropriate level of Spanish proficiency. So those were the 2 changes.
Peter.
Okay, so I probably didn't make my question clear then. And I'm not objecting to it. I just don't understand the reason. Why would one of the requirements be you've already been in a dual language program and not just that you have the Spanish language proficiency? I guess like that's the point that I'm not understanding.
Can you say that one more time? Maybe it's me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So number 2 says you can be considered for entry into the district if the student previously attended a dual language program and demonstrates an appropriate level of Spanish proficiency. So why the first condition? Like say you got here and you haven't been in a dual language program before, but you demonstrate the level of proficiency. What is the pedagogical reason for you might not be a good fit for entry?
Oh, so so 1 and 2 are not connected. In other words, like if you can qualify for 1 and 2 is not involved, or you qualify for 2 and 1 is not involved. They're not combined. It's not like you need 1 and 2. It's 1 or 2. Maybe I'm still not getting it. Sorry, Peter. It's been a long week.
No, I understand. So the number 1 is if your family identifies as Spanish speaking. Number 2 is for all other families or students. And I guess then the question is, do we care whether they were in a dual language program or they have an appropriate level of Spanish proficiency? Right? Like
I see. So I think Katie's, if I could jump in, Katie's thinking on that is that number 1, a student who's part of a dual language program, who's entering 1st grade, who's had 1 year of a dual language program, probably won't have the same level of proficiency as student who is Spanish speaking, right? They've had 1 year. So it was more of a protection so that for a student who had a kindergarten, I'm using this as an example, it's not the only one, who was in a dual language program in kindergarten, they may not have an intermediate level of receptive oral language in Spanish at the current time, right? That may not be where they got based on the quality of the program, the learning profile. So it's trying to make the berth a little wider than tighter by not being as stringent on some of those pieces. So that's sort of where the distinction is, and being a little more flexible with dual language learners because it's probably in their best interest to continue in a dual language program than go into a monolingual program. So it's providing a little more flexibility than if we just had the straight, how's your Spanish right now? So that was the thinking. Yeah.
I wonder if you add maybe enrolled only by one of the following ways. Somehow adding 1 so that that's clear, or adding an or in between 1 and 2. Jennifer?
I think I was let's see. The way I was interpreting Peter's question is just so sorry, maybe I think I'm sort of thinking and talking in circles. But like if you're a a child, a student who has Spanish proficiency, I think the 1 and 2 are presuming if you're a child who has Spanish proficiency, you either got it because your family is Spanish speaking, or you got it because you attended a dual language program. Like there probably isn't another way that you can get Spanish proficiency. I mean, maybe there is, but I think that these two are meant to say there's 2 ways that a child can have Spanish proficiency. Either their family speaks it or they were in a dual language program. That's how I was interpreting 1 and 2.
That was the
You got a
intention. So
thumbs
thank you.
up. Okay, so I will, oh, sorry, Peter.
Sorry, I won't belabor the point. So I'm fine with the wording as it is. Mike, I mean, I'm sure if there is a scenario that comes up in the future in which the program directors or the principal superintendent would like to admit someone that for some reason of technicality violates the policy, that you could bring it back to the school committee. I just don't want to get in a situation where, like, you know, some kid really needs the program, but they happen to, their current family isn't Spanish speaking, or, you know, they were living in a certain country for a certain number of years. Now they're in a different country and a different family. So, you know, so that was my only concern, is that I didn't want to make it too restrictive on a child who might need it. But, you know, if we're flexible enough to come back and revisit it if needed, then that's fine.
And so I'll make a motion. I move that we approve the policy, the Covenant's extended absence and transfer policy as presented.
I will second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer, and we'll take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
And Allison, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And with that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the building project update. And there's 2 items attached to this, but it looked to me like they were the same. Is that the case? There's really only one. Okay.
As I said, it was a long week. I apologize, and I apologize. I've tried to be good about putting documents in the Friday before, but it just wasn't possible last week. So I did get them in Monday morning first thing. So I apologize.
Thank you.
But I think in my haste to do that first thing Monday morning, I might have attached it twice. So better than 0 times, I suppose. So Ben's not here, so should I just jump right in?
I'll just turn it over to you.
Sure. So this is a presentation from the building committee meeting. I guess it was about a week and a half ago. And I think what's very exciting is now we're getting into getting real images of what the building, you know, potentially could look like. You know, to me, it's, you know, it's exciting, right? It's the slog part seems to mostly be over, right? And I think the beginning part, when you're hiring an owner project manager, it's you know, it's hard for the members of general public to see that we're actually building a building. And so we are making you know, also appointments for architects. They're meeting with different staff members. Sometimes I'm involved, sometimes I'm not, to gather feedback. I know there's a meeting today with like librarians, a technology teachers meeting, there's a classroom teachers meeting next week. They've met with special ed, they're meeting with ELL. So they continue to get additional feedback from our staff members about that. They met with the office staff to think about how the office can be arranged. So they really want to personalize the building to the primary users. They're looking forward to eventually being here and being with students, because that's, you know, something that they'd be really excited to engage with as well. I think it's also worth noting last Friday, we had a meeting about materials, and it was an in-person meeting. It was I'm trying to think how it was termed, but essentially a subcommittee of the building committee, but members of the public were invited, and it was in the Professional Development Center. And then we took a site visit to Fort River to have a real good look at where the building actually is on the site and have some dialogue. And there were members of the public at both meetings. And it was great to have members of the public present and be able to ask the architects questions. It was a less formal meeting than what we usually have at the building committee meeting, or these meetings. It was much more interactive. They brought kind of materials, a different slate, different color brick, different texture, so that they had different models and this cool video, which was like a 3-dimensional massing view, different kind of front entrances. So we're now getting into the stuff that's more interesting, I think, for many people to look at. I know they're interested in continuing to engage members of the community. I thought that was a really good meeting last Friday, because we had, I think the first part, 7 or 8 members of the public present and in the PD Center at the middle school, and most of them made it over to Fort River for our site visit as well. So that's sort of where we're going. Lots of interactions with staff of late, kind of lots of development, and that'll continue to accelerate. The more feedback they get from the community, from the building committee and the public, that's really driving a lot of the kind of design decisions. Just to review, the design is for new construction. The design is at Fort River School at that site. And now we're looking at how it fits on that site. And, there was a meeting with the food service director about where a truck's going to come in and what do they need in the kitchen, right? We're at that level of detail so they can gather feedback, because they have their standard template like every architects do, but they're personalizing it to kind of both the needs of our community, but also the desires. One of the things that they're also looking at is how to, Amherst is a community that is deeply invested in arts. And how to maybe integrate some arts, like we talked about the panels that are currently on Fort River. That may or may not be feasible in this building, but how to really add some of the culture and the nature of our community and have it reflected on the building. So, that's where we are at the moment with the building project. Our next meeting is on Friday morning. We'll be continuing to drill down and gather feedback from members of the building committee as well as the public. There's typically a healthy number of members of the public present, and we take public comment, and we take that very seriously on the building committee. And we're moving forward, and it's exciting to be in schematic design. We also have to look at some next steps about timeline and make sure we're communicating to the public. That's really on the town side, when this may end up coming up for a vote, so that we can backwards design and map out meetings, both for members of the building committee and the public, before we get to that stage. But I'm really excited at the developments that we're seeing. I'm excited about both the interior and the exterior and the possibilities. And it's just exciting to see things come together. I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll echo the words that I hear frequently from Kathy Shane, our building chair, is we're also concerned about cost, right? We're not assuming that we're in a world where inflation doesn't exist, or that the town has no cost limitations. And so we are really actively trying to balance, some of what we'd like to see, but also a very realistic cost-conscious approach to materials and use of the building as well. And it's something that I've commented on frequently, but I know Kathy is someone from the town council point of view who wants to get good value, right? We want a building that we're going to be really proud of for 50 years, that students, families, and staff members are going to be excited to work in, to visit. But we also are conscious that taxpayers are footing a large percentage of the bill. The MSBA is certainly helping with millions of dollars, but in the end, this is going to be a significant expenditure for the town, and we want to make sure we're balancing those appropriately and honoring those. So that's the balancing act we'll have, like every other building project, everywhere at the moment, and that's where we're pushing forward with things. So happy to answer any questions. The slide deck was pretty long. It was 40 some odd slides, I believe. So sorry to do it twice, put in there twice, but I think you can kind of see through that. Some of the images are starting to come into, being, not so much the colors or materials, because we're still having those dialogues, but getting a sense of the scale and how it fits on the site has really been a lot of our work.
So I'm not going to ask you to go through the 42 pages, but for those of us that weren't attending the building committee meetings, I'm wondering if you could just give us sort of a tour guide through it. So just as an example, there's a whole bunch of floor plans at the beginning, and it says option 1, option 2, PSR, and then it goes into more details. Can you explain what sort of, what is the differences there? You don't have to describe all the detail, but like, why are they looking at the different ones? And then the site plan, there was an option C and option D. Can you just give a high level what's going on there? What's that? And then some of the other, if there's anything else, just sort of, you could give us like the table of contents of how to navigate and what's going on in there. That would be
Absolutely.
helpful.
So some of the feedback they received from MSBA was some questions about some of our specialized program spaces, and some feedback we received was they wanted to see them more integrated into the classroom wings. So there's a couple different ways to do that. And, I think that was very appropriate. feedback for us to consider. And that's what we do at this phase is we know what the boxes are to a certain extent, but how they're configured is that. So, there was some conversation with people directly affected, special education staff. We do have a member of the special ed parent advisory committee on our building committee, which is great. So you'll see some of those those spaces moved. I think the other thing is just what do we want to have in the front entry, and how do we block off the building for community access in a way that feels comfortable for the school, so that when we are opening it up for whether it's gym use or there's a production in the cafetorium, what spaces do we want open and accessible to the community, and how do we lock off the rest of the building to provide safety and security for that? So you see a number of different examples there. There's also some arts suite dialogue that's happening. So where do we want the music rooms, and do we want the music room adjacent to the stage? And how about the small group for instrumental music room? So there's some different options that we have for some of those pieces. Let me just go forward in slides. Sorry, there's a lot of them. And in terms of site plan, it's really trying to figure out where do we want the playgrounds to be, and where do we want the adjacencies to be. Many of our schools now have a younger kid playground and an older kid playground, for lack of a fancier term. That's here, but there's a question of, do we want those adjacent to each other? Do we want those further apart from each other? There's some different schools of thought around that. Also, in terms of community use, there was conversations with Amherst Recreation about how they use it from the softball. We got feedback from the Amherst Youth Soccer Association. So trying to think about playing fields. Ultimate also is another sport that typically uses the Fort River field. So trying to balance the interests of wanting to have great fields for recess and regular use during the school day with also their after school use. So you see a couple different site plans in terms of where outdoor learning spaces are. I should mention Jen Reese, our garden coordinator, Leila Tennell, also works in our garden program, and Mary Kiley had a conversation this week with our architects thinking about outdoor learning. So again, this is still evolving, but sort of what elements do we want to have, and what adjacencies do we want to have for students to have access to outdoor learning as well as outdoor play. So those all get affected by different models that you're seeing. And, so that's some of the differences. Also where to put color in, and the elevations, some of what we saw last Friday. So that's after these had more depth to the building. So there was sort of, it wasn't just a flat panel for the three-story classroom wing. There was different sort of cutouts and different depth that was added there. So, those are some of the things that we're getting into at this point. And I think at the building committee meeting on Friday, as well as the one 2 weeks from now, I think things are coming together where we're getting a little more articulation in what the building could look like. And we're having more discussions that get a little narrower as we gather more feedback from staff. Is that sufficient level of detail? I mean, I could go on for long periods of time about this, but I'm trying to right size.
Nope, that was perfect.
Okay.
That was helpful. Thank you. Questions? Jennifer.
Yeah, on the topic of the fields and community uses of the fields, we school committee members received an email that some community members had submitted a grant application to the Community Preservation Act committee for funding for the Fort River playing fields, which I was actually excited to see, and I fully support that effort, and I hope that the CPA is able to grant some funds to support those playing fields. My understanding is that if that has the potential to possibly lower the amount of the project cost, and therefore lower the amount that will need to be passed in the debt exclusion override, which hopefully will make it even more appealing to the community and to voters, as well as the fact that community members beyond the school community will be able to use the field, like soccer and ultimate, as Mike mentioned. So I don't know that I have a question so much as I just wanted to remark that I really appreciate the community members who submitted the application, and I'm hopeful that it will be fruitful for the project.
Peter.
So Mike, thank you for that summary. If I could ask you about the LEED daylight credit, and I don't need a senior level thesis on spatial daylight autonomy, but I tried to understand those slides, and I think I got about 80% understanding. And my sense was that this is a credit that might lower the cost, but it would sacrifice optimal daylight. Is this one of the challenges the building committee is working through in terms of cost value? And if so, I would just add my 2 cents that um, a modern building with daylight, having gone through what we have with Fort River and Wildwood, is very near the top of my list in terms of building quality. And so I hope that's not something that gets sacrificed in terms of what we're able to provide.
Right. Where's Bruce Colden when you need him? Our daylighting expert from our community. I mean that authentically. He's wonderful. He's come to lots and lots of building committee meetings over the years. So what I understand about daylighting is that, you know, you have to sort of, again, right size what you want, because what you don't want is so much light pouring through that you get glare and that everyone puts shades up, and then actually the daylighting is lost because it's more than what people can have. So it's not just about the number of windows, it's about the height of the windows. So if you get higher windows, generally can spread it out more without the glare, but it again depends what direction you're facing. Right. If you're facing north, it's really different than you're facing south and east and west as well. So I think, you know, what I understood from that dialogue was really around making sure that we have appropriate daylighting, that on a bright sunny day, we're not having glare, but that lights, you know, the goal is the lights sort of to be optional, you know, that you'd have enough light coming in naturally. We were able to do that. And they're trying to, again, windows can also be a place where you get heat, right, on a hot day, and that uses more electricity to cool the rooms, or vice versa, right? In cold weather, it's not going to be as insulated as a wall will be. So it's daylighting and energy efficiency have a relationship that has to be factored in. And I think that's where the architects and particularly the engineers who are working on it are trying to find that right balance. We certainly want a tremendous amount of daylight, but we also are building a net zero school, and we have to balance those two factors to you know, to have it right, because the net zero part is not negotiable, right? So that's the sort of balance that I think you're reading into that, is how do we make sure that we have sufficient daylight and we're not building more PV arrays to account for that, because that, you know, building PVs are great, but building PVs takes carbon, right? Like it's not carbon neutral to create that. So I think that's the balancing act that the engineers are trying to work on.
So I know that Ben technically is our representative on the board, but I'm hoping that that we can offer some feedback that could be taken. And I would just I don't want to go into the weeds on the appearances, the external appearances, but when I see that very like super colorful one, as fun as that is, the only thing that I would ask the building committee to think about is that design we'll be living with it for 50 years into the future. And so what might look really cool and hip and fun right now might look really, really dated in even just 10 years. So I think, really focusing on sort of timeless design, while, that's a tricky balance that I can't do, but the designers can do. But I would encourage us not to get too excited with something that might look dated in a few years.
I think it's a really good point. I can think of the odd green lights in the wall, right? If you've been in Summit Academy, I'm sure at the time that wing was built, it was awesome that there was like green windows, and now it really doesn't seem so cool. And so I think we've got plenty of other examples. That's the one that just stands out because a lot of design work went into creating these odd green windows. What feels odd to be green windows now, but at the time, I mean, clearly it was a lot more work than just building a brick wall or putting a window in. So I'm sure time, effort, and resources went into that financially, that in 2022 and probably 2010 and probably 2002, it still felt gaudy at best. Yeah. So thank you. That's a really good, helpful frame that I can bring back for you, Elson.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments that we want to sort of convey to the building committee? No. Okay. Seeing none, then we will move on to our next topic, which is goals, FY23 goals. So a revised draft, thank you, Mike, is attached to the agenda here. And so our hope is if we're ready to vote on these changes, and I think we might make live edits as well if there's minor changes or tweaks. Jennifer.
I have a question that maybe is a content question or maybe is a wording question. In 1D, where it says provide opportunities for current 5th and 6th grade students to tour the ARMS building and to begin building connections with the middle school. Are those two different things, like tour the building and begin building connections? Or is like building connections under the umbrella of touring the building? Because touring the building sounds very clear and straightforward and like you know if it happened or not. But building connections at the middle school feels a little bit more fuzzy. So I just, what is the intention of that, or what does that mean?
Totally fair critique. Let me just scroll up so that people can see it. I'm sorry. The intention was that before the end of the year, that students would be able to meet who would be the kind of 6th grade lead, you know, whatever the administrative role is, and be able to build some connections, and also to know current 5th grade students, excuse me, to know who the 6th grade teachers would be and start building those connections, because it's a larger transition than it's a new first-time transition. So it was intended to be two different things. I'm not suggesting it's fuzzy, not fuzzy, like, and I'm happy to remove it if folks don't think it's needed or beneficial. But for me, it was two distinct things that would happen at distinct times, not just while a tour of a building was happening, but that there would be actual real human connections between 5th grade students and folks who'd be working with them when they were in 6th grade. I'm sorry that wasn't more clear. My apologies.
No, that's helpful to have you clarify. And I think now that you've clarified it, I think the wording is fine. Okay.
So the changes, just to be explicit, were on goals 4 and 5 based on the feedback last time. I worked with Doug on goal number 4 and Doreen on goal number 5 to try to make them more specific, take out some of the more vague information. I'm not saying they're good to go. That's obviously your call, but those were the changes that were made. They're also shorter in duration, so they're less words.
Peter.
So yeah, I'm happy with these goals as articulated, and I'm happy to vote in support of them tonight. I do worry about the volume, though. I mean, there are some things here that even if we didn't have a superintendent goals process, you would be doing anyway, given the things that are going on. And so it's not that, I'm thinking about things that are at times over the course of this school year are going to like be your burning number one can't ignore priority. And like, the 6th grade to the middle school, like that, there's no do-overs on that transition process, right? So and I know you're not gonna like just check out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon if 3-4 things have to be done on that. And the school building project obviously is a major thing that has to cross the finish line. So I'm looking for places, and I'm also cognizant that you work for 2 other districts who are also going to be giving you goals. And I know that we have a contractual organizational principle of not giving you more than 8, but I'm looking at like goal number 4, and I would love for you to organize and orchestrate budget forums to discuss with bargaining unit leaders and CPAC and MPAC and PGOs. I'm just wondering if it's too much, and if you've already thought about this and you're like, no, you think that you can swing all this, then I'm happy to support you on it. I just want to make sure that we're not in a year that has a couple of things that aren't going to have one chance to succeed. I don't want to overburden our expectations.
Mike.
Thank you. So I guess my concern a little bit is similar to what Peter said, that some of these aren't going to cut across the multiple districts, right? So when we think about goals, right, number 1, you know, I won't talk about another district, but it's pretty focused on students who are Amherst Public School students who will continue to be Amherst Public School students. Yes, there's an impact on one other district and not really on another, but that's a pretty specific goal. Certainly number 2 is unique to the Amherst Public Schools. Number 3 is shared with one of the districts, but not the other. So, you know, this list doesn't seem overwhelming. I think since the other 2 districts haven't come up with goal guidance yet, there is a caution point for me about what that does to the other districts and how many goals get added that are unique to those districts. And then we sort of back to where we were several years ago before we sort of more fine tune this process. So I think it's a, valid concern. I appreciate you raising it. Like goal number 4 is something that certainly, we're going to do no matter, whether it's a goal or not. I think it's really important, but I also think this is a lot of goals that are pretty unique to one district, because as it relates to budget, that by definition, that has to be unique to the Amherst Public Schools, right? We can't engage those groups in 3 different budgets in the same meeting, right? That's not how anyone's, mine or Doug's included, mine can process that much information. So I think it's a caution point. I'm not sure quite what to do with it. I was trying to respond to the guidance I received, right? Which was very helpful guidance. That's not a critique of it, but a lot of these are really specific to this particular district. And I'm not going to say it's too much, because there are things that are really important that are going to happen. But in terms of goals, I think I have the same wondering that Peter expressed.
I think what we're getting at is that it's just our overall goal setting and evaluation process, because we don't have a mechanism. We have a contractual agreement in terms of the maximum number of goals, and yet we don't have a mechanism right now in place or process-wise that has the 3 districts coordinating and collaborating to get that done. Wearing my Amherst hat and not my other hat from any other one, I sort of like, do we delay and pause and wait until sort of the other districts and the other school committees sort of get to the same point that we are? We can't change sort of what didn't happen in the past in terms of that sort of collaboration, earlier in the year to sort of come up with a joint plan. So I struggle to say, like, 1, 2, and 3. I feel like those are absolute priorities for us, and I don't think that and yes, they are unique to the Amherst School District, and I do feel like they need to be here. We have a brand new curriculum. I don't think that the 2 are non-negotiable. They're happening. So, but 3, we just implemented a new math curriculum, and it's imperative that the implementation, continues to be successful. So I guess that's sort of a non-response. I don't really have a solution other than, I think going forward, it'd be worth us like really coming up and deciding on a more collaborative approach to developing the goals on a timeline that works, so that we're not, making goals in November and December. Because I think what we were trying to do was to avoid what happened last year, which was we were voting on goals in November. Half the year is gone. The one thought that I did have, we don't have a place in our current instrument to consider this, but it is something that sort of in my organizational corporate world is weighting of the different of goals, right? So we could consider divvying it up so that 4 and 5 are more sort of, 4 is a support, not do. I think the way you've written it, it's clear that it's the school committee's efforts, the school committee's initiatives, and we're asking that you support, you and the team support that effort. And then the staff diversity goals is an ongoing one. So what, to Peter's comment about some of these things are what are happening in the day-to-day work and will always be happening. So to what extent do they need to be a priority goal, as opposed to maybe we don't want it to be not on the radar for a goal, but maybe it's a maybe it has a lower weighting. That may be more complex than what we want to tackle right now on the fly, but I just throw that out there as one idea. Oh, Peter.
Yeah, so I think these are good comments for to help improve the process. I think, in future years, maybe one thing that could maybe align the efforts a little more is, as soon as a committee, any of the three, has a draft of goals, they contact the chair of the other committees and they say, let's, as early on in the process, let's see if there are alignment points. And then when we're discussing draft goals at the Amherst School Committee, we can even have the draft goals from the regional committee or from Pelham, and have those so that we say, oh, okay, how do we make this manageable? So that maybe that's like a process improvement. The weighting is a nice idea. I'm very skeptical that it's something we could implement in time efficient order that would be satisfying to all. Yeah, I just think it introduces a level of complexity. Not that it's without merit if done really well, but I think that's the linchpin. So I think, the way to go forward, a way to go forward with this, that I would be comfortable with, is just the committee being mindful that, two of the 5 goals here are collaborative goals, right? The second one is collaborative with the Amherst School Committee and the School Building Committee, and the fourth one is supporting the Amherst School Committee's effort. So I think if we understand that in the context, and we're saying it out loud and consciously and intentionally, that will inform how we look at the superintendent's efforts and ultimately how we evaluate his performance on those goals. So I think with that, I'm comfortable. I think the only other alternative I think would be to really delay the process. And even though September 20th feels early, relatively speaking, I am conscious that these are FY 23 goals, and that starts 7/1/22. So technically, we're already a few months late, but that would require an entirely different process, meeting on the summer or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I feel like if we're all on that kind of same page of we understand the issues, we understand the complexities of the process and the number of goals, and that some of these aren't solo efforts. I think I'm okay moving forward with it.
Any other thoughts? I'm not seeing any, but we just have a lot to chew on. Then I'm going to move that we approve the superintendent goals as presented.
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Peter. We'll take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Allison, aye. Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
The motion passed unanimously. Thank you. And next we are talking about in-person school committee meetings. So I think, as we alluded to at the last meeting, we had hoped to have started or resume in-person meetings, but we were hampered by sort of issues and challenges with Amherst Media. They were in the midst of a move, and I think then technically they just facing a lot of challenges. So I think what we wanted to talk about was and just because Jennifer and Irv were not part of the committee before COVID, we had shifted to be moving in the town hall, in the town room, where systems were set up, but also we're an Amherst school committee, not a regional school committee meeting. So wanted to be able to meet on sort of Amherst an Amherst site, if you will, as opposed to a regional site. So we had been meeting in the town room, and for a variety of reasons, we weren't able to do that for the last meeting or for this meeting for that matter. So we wanted to just talk about that because I know, Mike, you've been working with Amherst Media and Jerry Champagne and others to sort of figure out a solution for us to be able to resume in-person meetings. And just wanted to talk about that plan and sort of what the implications might be for future meetings. So I don't know if you have any updates, Mike, that you wanted to. I can't remember all the technical issues that we that we had.
Right. So now you're again. I'll do my best to describe this. This is like asking me about daylighting, right? Not my area of background, but so Amherst Media, when they were in their old site, were on sort of the network, the fiber connection or whatever it is to both the schools and the town. Now that they're off that, it creates an additional challenge for the live telecasting of meetings. And so I know Alexis, thank you, Alexis, you're on there tonight, has been trying to work with Jerry on a potential solution that will allow for live taping of meetings. One of the reasons I encouraged Allison not to put this on last time is the town meeting was, the town council was sort of deciding what they were going to do. And it looks like they're going to continue separate from in-person or remote, but they're still, their main mechanism is going to be Zoom. So that's different than doing, that's my understanding anyway. So that's different than doing a traditional in-person meeting, even if we include the kind of allowance of different public comments that predated, that's now in policy. So if we were going to do a meeting that was videotaped live as opposed to through a computer, we would just need to work out those systems with Amherst Media and our technology department. My last conversation with Jerry Champagne, our IS director, was pretty optimistic about the potential to do it. Timeline seemed a little more complex about doing this. I think there was some discussion between Amherst Media, between Alexis and Amherst Media and Jerry about what devices would be needed and how that would work. So I don't think it could be set up overnight, but I think that's the primary limitation for us right now. Town Hall had a limitation on the number of visitors. I think that would be, I think that's kind of relaxing a bit, but I think there's still some things to be worked out there. The library is a much larger site where, limitations in terms of members of the public would not be as much of a concern. So, honestly, my preference is if we can work it out at our high school library. It's, from a COVID perspective, I think, bluntly, we know what the ventilation is in there. I feel comfortable with that. Members of the public wants to come in larger numbers. I think there is space to spread out. So, my personal comfort level is pretty good in terms of the the library. It's not that I personally am uncomfortable. I'm in in-person meetings all the time, so this doesn't affect me. When I say personally, it's just my professional view. I shouldn't say personal. But professionally, members of the public might feel more comfortable if they had more space, whereas if we have a lot of people, the town hall gets a little tight. So that's sort of why, if we were going to explore and coming back to in-person meetings, I have a slight preference, not a heavy preference, but a slight preference for the high school library, because I'll be in front of the room anyway with you all. So that's not so much my concern. My concern is much more about being truly open to members of the public and supporting members of the public who may want to come, but if there's 30 people there, they'd want to be not sandwiched between people, which is a lot easier in the high school library than it is at town hall. The chairs are much more comfortable at town hall, right? Like, I know there's some other advantages of being at town hall, but to me, if we're going to open up in-person meetings, having the public be most comfortable as possible coming would be the most significant priority for me. Sorry, not speaking well at night tonight.
And so I think, just to clarify, because it's been a long time since we were broadcasting from an in-person meeting, that it gets broadcast on the Amherst Media TV channels on cable, as well as on the Amherst Media website when we were doing live streaming of our in-person meetings, correct? Yeah. So, and with the current situation with the open meeting laws, that the sort of relaxation has been extended, which prior to that, without that extension, we had to have an in-person quorum in order to have the meeting. And we don't have that restriction, so we don't have to have we won't have to have a minimum of 3 of us in person and present at the in-person meeting in order to comply with open meeting laws. So I just want to state that in terms of sort of what does that mean practically and logistically when we do resume in-person meetings. So folks would still be able to participate remotely, and school committee members would still be able to participate remotely. Members of the public would still be able to view live stream meetings either on their devices on the Amherst Media website or on Amherst Media on the TV. Peter.
Thank you very much, both of you, for doing things that aren't your expertise or shouldn't be your role, which is one of my frustrations with this, by the way. You, Allison, and Mike have been super great about managing the logistics of these meetings and all the technology associated with it when you shouldn't have to. Like, I think sometimes when people, get a little frustrated, maybe with like signals dropping or this meeting got scheduled this way or with the school committee, like we don't have the level of administrative support the town council has. It's like our superintendent does logistics that really shouldn't be part of his job description. And he does it because, he's able to do it and he likes helping us and it's great. And I really appreciate the support he gives to our committee. But anyway, these logistics can get a little frustrating. I'm very much looking forward to getting back to in-person as soon as possible. There was some misunderstanding for a long time during COVID that like we were choosing not to go back in person when we had the opportunity, and we didn't have the opportunity. We wanted to talk about the town room and town hall, and those weren't allowed. So now we have the opportunity, and to me, it's not really much of a debate. It's it's not like which do we like better. It's this what we're doing right here right now is a stopgap emergency measure. And it's super great that people were able to access these meetings during COVID. But, and not that COVID's, over by any stretch, it will be endemic with us, I'm sure, for a long time. But, we have to get back to a steady state. And I think there's aspects of meeting in person that we miss when we're in Zoom. Not to opine too long, but, having done this, long in the tooth now, I miss those certain dynamics of those in-person what an in-person meeting can have, and in terms of the discussion and the relationships and the onboarding and all that stuff. So I say I'm kind of site agnostic, wherever we can get that's going to be steady and reliable, the better. I like the atmosphere of the high school library better than the Amherst Town Hall if I'm just comparing the vibe. I feel like the Amherst Town room is a bit like you're up there on the Supreme Court and you have your microphone, you're a little distanced. So, I would be happy with doing the library. We should try and get back to the town room at the town hall, though. That's where we ought to be as a town board in Amherst. So yeah, and I guess just to clarify, so when we say that members can be remote, do we mean they can call in, or that we would be doing a Zoom meeting at the same time as the in-person meeting? Because that might get a little dodgy.
We would not be doing a hybrid meeting in the same way that the town council is doing hybrid meetings. So I think the default would be calling in, which could be done, there could be, if multiple members need to call in, that could be a Google Meet so that there's one phone number for everybody to call into and conference in. I asked Mike if we could explore setting up again, if there's more than one person or even one person, that we could explore having a private Google Meet that's just for school committee members, that then we could sort of, because we have that computer at the library, at least we have that computer that we use for projecting presentations. It could potentially be a Google Meet that gets projected so that the people's faces of folks that are calling in, if they want to. But I don't know technically if that's going to be feasible. I think we'd have to explore that once we get going. Jennifer.
So did you say that members of the public will still be able to participate remotely, meaning will they be able to give a live comment remotely?
No, they would not, because there would not be a public meeting link for them to comment remotely. They would still be able to record a voicemail that would get played live during the meeting. They would still be able to submit an email that would get displayed on screen in the public meeting, and they would be welcome to come to the in-person meeting to speak.
Okay, I guess my my focus or my priority would be when we go back in person to do it in a way that is most most transparent / most welcoming. I don't know, in a way that like members of the public will feel most comfortable. I don't know if it's partly what Mike said about making sure that there's enough space so that people feel more comfortable being in a larger space. I guess those are my concerns is can we do it in a way that's most welcoming for members of the public?
I do think that one of the things, because we have a deadline of 3:30 for public comment, and that's necessary, I think, for the written comment, because on times when we get inundated with volume, it's just compiling them to get them ready to display on screen is a challenge. But the voicemail ones, I do wonder, and then of course, then it gets confusing for members of the public. But the voicemail, I mean, in theory, we could accept a voicemail, audio recordings up until, 6 o'clock, because that's just a matter of sort of going in and just playing them as they from there. So it is something that we can consider there too. Peter?
Yeah. So I think as we smooth this stuff out, it's not all going to be like perfect the first time. It's like in terms of remote member participation and presentations and in-person public comment plus voicemail and all that. But I think we all share the same values here, which is we want everybody to be able to access the meetings as much as possible, to be able to contact us through as many means possible, and to be comfortable, viewing and attending the meetings. Yeah, so maybe if we have like and I guess it might be a Jerry Champagne tech question, but if we have a conference call device or a speakerphone that members are calling in anyway, if we had a dedicated number, maybe it's the same number as the voicemail, you could potentially have live public comment by people calling into the number, right? And so then you say, here's the public comment number during the meeting, so that if they're watching the meeting, they call the number and then they're played on the conference call device on the speaker. That's just a technical possibility. But maybe
I don't know how you would manage a queue of people, because everybody, it would just be what, because right now that's just a one-to-one. So yeah, so I don't. Yeah. But food for thought as we, and I think that's a really good point, because when we shifted to virtual meetings, it took us a while before we figured out how we were going to do it. We didn't have, I think, the first few times we might not have even had public comment. I can't remember how we did it originally, because we hadn't yet worked through sort of our policy and how we would enable sort of public comment at those meetings. So it evolved over time, and then we keep expanding also how people can participate in meetings, and we've changed that. So I think, yeah, I think we all like share that same value, and I think if we're open to sort of learning and sort of are patient with ourselves and each other, if we don't get it right immediately for the first time, because I think it's been a while since we've been there, and we have different expectations of ourselves now after 2 years plus of virtual meetings. So I think that would be, I take it as a learning. Mike?
So I just want to, in terms of next steps, I just want to see if, because I've heard from everybody, would people like me to ask Jerry to continue to engage with Amherst Me to see if the October meeting, and I can't promise this because I literally can't promise it because I don't understand it. But to see if the October meeting for the Amherst School Committee can be in person, because I think what Jerry will say is, what's the timeline? When do you need it? And, are people thinking October? Are people thinking November? Is everyone on board with it? And I'm only asking because there's logistical parts that I have to task someone with, and not to pressure you into a decision, but I think if we do nothing after this meeting, nothing will have happened that moves us closer to being in person. So I can't promise anything, but at least I can take an aspiration back to Jerry and to work with Alexis and Amherst Media on it.
I think yes, the October meeting, unless I see objections, I'd say if we set that timeline and then it doesn't happen, then we're at November, and that's great. But I think if we set November, then it might not be. I'd worry that it wouldn't be November. So I think if we set that as our goal, and we'll just know a week ahead of time, maybe make the decision a week ahead of time whether we're ready or not. Okay. So speaking of the October meeting, our next item is future agenda planning, and we pushed a couple things that had been. I'm not sure I'm looking at the right calendar. October 18th is our next meeting. Is that correct?
I think so, but give me just 1 second to look. I'm sorry.
Yes.
18th. My apologies.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we had that had been requested that we sort of pushed to the October meeting was the health curriculum related to LGBTQ+, cell phone policy, and in the elementary schools, and an update on the 6th grade to the middle school work. From the sounds of the, is the CRESS was the CRESS MOU, I think, was another one. And I'm wondering if we'll also want a school building project update, given sort of the volume of things that you're working on. But enrollment, you mentioned during your update, Mike, that you wanted a future agenda item to discuss enrollment at the schools.
Yeah, it could be October, could also be November. At that point we'll be a little further along in 6th grade planning. But yeah, I mean, I just think we should have an open conversation about that. But if October looks booked, I don't think waiting till November will. I want to do it before the budget process. I'll put it like,
right.
Well,
and I just know that because it was called to our attention last year by a community member that our policy actually states that we do talk about it, and I can't remember if the policy states a specific month or just that it happens. So we'll look at that. Any other? Okay. And again, it's a lot, so we'll look at where we're at with those, and consider enrollment for November if need be. Okay. Warrant report. I need to double check to see if I believe I may have just a couple. I have 2. So a lot quicker than last time. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $732,903.23, dated September 7th, 2022, and I signed that on September 6th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $16,804.69 for a warrant dated September 16th, 2022. This includes general funds expenses of $13,490.02, grant fund expenses of $968.49, and miscellaneous of expenses of $2,346.18. And I signed that on September 19th, 2022. And that is all I have. And next is gifts, and I don't see any gifts attached, so I don't think we have any there. So ahead of schedule, I will move to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn?
We got 15 minutes to go. Come on.
I will
But there's
second that.
nothing. Thank you, Jennifer. Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer. There's no discussion, and we'll take a vote. Peter?
Peter, I.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
And Allison, I. Did you raise your hand, Jennifer? No.
No, that was an accident.
Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.